Federal Marshal Wayne Richie felt a little off after having just one drink at a government party. That same evening, without being provoked, he pulled his gun on a stranger. Well, years later, he'd learned that he had been the unwitting victim of the now famous CIA mind program, MKULTRA. If you're one of the very few people who watch this channel on a regular basis, then most likely you're the type of person who already knows all about the horrible atrocities that the United States government did, in the name of science, trying to discover ways to control the human mind. It's absolutely horrible. There were hundreds of experiments, some people call them torture sessions, that the government did on its own citizens. The most famous, of course, was that of Frank Olson, and I bet you've heard of it. If you haven't, let me just quickly recap. There's an official CIA report stating that a man named Frank Olson committed suicide on November 28, 1953, by jumping out of the 10th floor of the Statler Hotel in New York City, New York. The report talks about him being given doses of LSD, and there's a lawsuit involved. Well, what some people don't know is that Olson was deeply involved in the MKUltra project, and many believe that he just really didn't have the stomach for what was going on, and the person heading up the program considered him to be a security risk. Well, it's not too difficult to put two and two together from there, right? There's plenty of evidence to suggest that whether they successfully used mind control techniques to convince him to jump, or whether he was just thrown out of the window, his death was most certainly not a suicide. And no doubt, there were countless other victims from this program as well. And the scariest part is this: most of them never even knew they were victims, like the case of Wayne Richie. Wayne Allen Ritchie was born to Walter and Josephine Ritchie on June 15, 1927, and from a very young age, he shared a strong desire to do great things with his life. He was always kind-natured, and he excelled at just about everything that he did. After high school, he joined the United States Marine Corps. There, he created an impeccable service record, quickly making the rank of sergeant and then becoming an outstanding sharpshooter. After he was discharged from the military, he landed a position as a prison guard at the very selective and very famous federal penitentiary, Alcatraz in California. As he worked there, he was held in the absolute highest regard. Then, in 1954, a lifelong dream came true when he proudly and excitedly accepted the position of United States Federal Marshal. And at that moment in his life, he couldn't have been happier. And for the next 3 years, his record soared even higher as he outshined all of his peers. He aced every single test, and he was always known for keeping calm under pressure. But then, on December 20th, 1957, everything changed. Ritchie's office was located in the same building as the post office, and the post office workers were having a Christmas party. Well, Ritchie popped in around lunchtime. He greeted a few people, and then he agreed that he would return once he was finished working. A few hours later, he stopped in again. But this time, he bumped into an overly large, bald-headed man with icy blue eyes. Ritchie didn't know it at the time, and he wouldn't find out until 4 decades later, but this man was George Hunter White. Although George Hunter White did work for the federal government, he most certainly wasn't a postal worker, and he wasn't at the party just to mingle. He had a mission, and his mission expressly involved Wayne Richie. Well, the men started talking, and they shared a drink. Somehow, without Ritchie noticing, the man slipped a white powdery substance into Ritchie's glass. Shortly after finishing his drink, Ritchie began to feel uneasy, and he decided that he needed to leave the party, so he went back to his office to clean up his desk and get ready to go home. While he was there, his uneasiness escalated to anxiety. The man who never lost his cool was now having trouble controlling his emotions. For just a moment, he had the most peculiar urge. His anger welled up so strongly inside of him, and for no reason at all, he wanted nothing more than to retrieve his service revolvers from his locker and do something horrible with them. Well, he struggled, but he was able to fight off the feeling, and then he went home. Along the way, his anxiety continued to grow until he felt that he was absolutely crawling out of his skin. At home, he struggled to communicate with his girlfriend, and just moments after he walked in the door, he found himself shouting at her. Well, afraid that he might not be able to control himself, he left the house, and then he aimlessly meandered around the streets of San Francisco for a while. He later said that during this time, bizarre emotions and psychedelic images seemed to just kind of come into his head from nowhere, and then they would run rampant in his mind, and they were urging him to go to his office and get his guns and hurt someone. He said that it felt as if they were real, like an outside thing somehow being forced into his head. Well, finally, on the very edge of oblivion, he went to his locker and he retrieved those guns. Then, an hour later, looking more like a deranged gangster than a U.S. Marshal, he entered the Shady Grove Bar on Hyatt Street. He walked up to the bartender, and for no reason at all, except to satisfy these dark urges that were bombarding his brain, he pulled out both of his guns and he pointed them at the man and then demanded money. Luckily, a waitress and another individual worked together. She, standing on one side of Ritchie, asked him a question, and when Ritchie shifted his attention toward her, the man on the other side cold-cocked Ritchie and knocked him out. The next day, Ritchie's anxiety was completely gone, and he remembered very little about what happened after he had left that Christmas party the day before, and he had completely forgotten that he had ever even met George Hunter White. Well, because no one was hurt, and because of Ritchie's more than stellar life record, the judge only gave him probation, but his life was now ruined. His dreams and his days of being a U.S. Marshal were over. Still, from that day forward, Ritchie returned to his normal calm demeanor, and really was just an outstanding guy for the rest of his life. He married a beautiful woman named Virginia, and together they spent many years delivering food to the hungry, working with battered women and children, and giving to the poor. Ritchie's friends said that he would never hesitate to get up in the middle of the night and help a person in need. They said that he always shared whatever he had with those less fortunate. Suffice it to say that Ritchie's character on that one day, December 20th, 1957, did not match at all, and in fact was in stark contrast to every other day of his life, before and after. Now, no one puzzled over this more than Ritchie did. He just couldn't figure out what in the world had happened that day. Then, on March 11, 1999, the Jose Mercury newspaper ran an article about a man named Sidney Gottlieb and a CIA program that involved mind control experiments. After reading the article, Ritchie began to investigate, and he discovered that experiments had been going on in the same area and on the same day as that Christmas party he went to in 1957. Well, he got some doctors involved, and other experts looked into the case as well, and they all supported Ritchie's theories. So, Ritchie filed a lawsuit under the Federal Tort Claims Act against the United States. And although he had gathered quite a bit of evidence supporting the idea that he had in fact been a victim of the CIA's mind control program, evidence that included that George Hunter White, who had worked right underneath MKULTRA's director, Sidney Gottlieb, had been actively conducting mind control experiments that same day in December, less than 2 miles from that Christmas party that he attended, it didn't help. It was sad, too, because Ritchie was even able to provide evidence that White was at the Christmas party. An entry found in White's own leather-bound schedule book, dated December 20th, 1957, read, "Xmas Party, Federal Building, Press Room." Sadly, the judge ruled that too many years had passed and too much information had been tainted, and the case was thrown out. What is it that makes a person evil? You know, there's this cute little poem from the pages of antiquity where one little boy asks another, "When was the devil born?" The second little boy says, "Silly, no one knows when the devil was born, but you better never let him catch you. He'll make you do all sorts of horrible things." We may not know the devil's birthday, but we do know Sidney Gottlieb's, and what a sad day for America and for the world that was. Sidney Gottlieb, who would later be known by many names, including Dr. Death, Black Sorcerer, Mad Scientist, Poisoner in Chief, and several others, was born on August 3, 1918, to Fannie Lewis Gottlieb. And according to one source, his mother actually screamed the moment that she saw him. Fitting, I guess, but she didn't scream because she somehow was able to see the future and all the terrible atrocities that he would one day commit. No, she screamed because of his horribly deformed feet. Gottlieb had clubbed feet, and he couldn't even walk without assistance for the first 12 years of his life. His parents paid for several operations, but he would always walk with a limp. Clubbed feet wasn't his only handicap either. Along with his inability to walk, he also developed a heavy stutter, and he had severe trouble communicating while he was young. After high school, he went to City College, and then he got his doctorate in biochemistry from Caltech in Pasadena, California, on June 11, 1943. After that, he worked several jobs before he finally found his place with the CIA. On Friday the 13th, what an ominous sign, right? Of July 1951, Gottlieb reported for his first day of work. The CIA needed a chemist to oversee this new program that they had called Project Bluebird. This program involved mind control. Top secret intel right around this time, obtained by secret operatives, falsely led the United States government to believe that the Soviets had developed and perfected mind control techniques that could make a person do or say things against his or her will. Gottlieb was groomed to oversee this project. Well, after a 3-month course in espionage, he was given the official title of Chief of the Technical Services Staff, or TSS for short. Gottlieb jumped headfirst into the project, and he worked nearly day and night, devoting so much time to it that the powers that be saw it as a completely new project, Gottlieb's project. So they granted him more powers and they renamed it. It now became Project Artichoke, which, incidentally, was the name of a deadly New York mobster at the time. Coincidence? Anyway, as soon as Artichoke was up and running smoothly, Gottlieb was given a nefarious directive. He was to set up safe houses all through the United States. These safe houses were to be equipped with recording devices in order to test different drugs and techniques on American citizens. In the beginning, these tests were supposed to be voluntary, and there were, of course, safeguards to protect these American citizens from the more extreme tests. But for the CIA's victims in other countries, there were no safeguards. According to the CIA's own records, subjects abroad, often prisoners of war, were exposed to all manner of torture, some of which were sleep deprivation, extreme temperatures, extreme noises, electroshock treatment, the exposure to all types of different bacteria, poisons, fungi. They caused subjects to contract illnesses that would create fevers and then delirium. They deprived subjects of entire food groups like sugars, proteins, vegetables, even vitamins. They would repeatedly give these subjects stimulants, then depressants, then stimulants, and then depressants again. They did this over and over until that person couldn't hold a single thought correctly. And they did all of this in a quest to learn how to control someone's mind to get him or her to do whatever it was that was wanted. Although the CIA was conducting these deeper level mind control experiments in other parts of the world, Gottlieb wanted, now get this, can we say evil? He wanted more hands-on control and more power over his quote-unquote volunteers here in the United States. And unlike the current group of volunteers, he didn't want this new group to know what was happening to them. He felt that it was important to test these subjects to such extremes without their knowledge. One would think that this would be something that the United States government just would not allow, right? Well, on April 13th, there's that 13 again, 1953, Gottlieb got his wish, and he was given complete autonomy and full reign to conduct any and all experiments that he saw fit within the borders of the United States and on American citizens. Well, a new name for the project came with Gottlieb's seemingly limitless powers, and MKULTRA was born. and it would run under that name for the next 20 years. And during that time, Gottlieb would, of course, hire Kurt Blum. Kurt Blum had been the director of the Nazis' biological warfare program in Germany during World War II. Wow. It's nearly impossible to say all that went on during this time and who all became victims, as Gottlieb himself destroyed all or most of MKUltra's records in 1973. But there's no reason to believe that the atrocities that were done to Americans were any less horrible than the atrocities that had been done to non-Americans. Now that Gottlieb had been granted permission to experiment on unsuspecting Americans, well, he needed a way to do so without getting caught, right? So, believe it or not, Gottlieb decided that he would hire a magician. Gottlieb's quest to control the mind often required administering chemicals to unsuspecting subjects. At different times, an agent might need to slip someone a drug without his or her knowledge. This, of course, called for sleight of hand, and although some agents were fairly good at this, most weren't. So Gottlieb hired a magician to help teach his agents how to poison unsuspecting victims with powders, capsules, sprays, droplets, or any other forms of drugs that he and Blum might come up with. Well, we don't know how many magicians that Gottlieb contacted. Maybe it was just the one. In any case, John Mulholland took the job. John Mulholland was the former apprentice of Harry Houdini, and he proclaimed himself as the master of the psychology of deception, and he absolutely jumped at the chance to work with the CIA. Gottlieb had the toxins, and Mulholland had the tricks. And no lie, Gottlieb contracted Mulholland to create a sleight-of-hand training manual for his agents. Can't you just picture it? Here's a magician. He's teaching CIA agents how to do sleight of hand so they can manipulate unsuspecting Americans in some crazy attempt to try to find the ultimate mind control technique in order to create nothing less than the Manchurian Candidate. You know, I don't think that one could find a crazier idea in a fictional spy novel. Mulholland's manual was extremely detailed, and it described techniques for dispensing poisons in all sorts of ways. For example, in the Handling Powders chapter, Mulholland described in minute detail how one can dispense poisonous powders from the eraser end of a pencil.
The performer brings his right hand over the mouth of the glass containing the spectator's beverage. As soon as the spectator looks at the performer and begins to answer the question, the performer, by twisting his wrist, turns the point of the pencil towards the ceiling. Simultaneously, he takes his thumb away from the open end of the pencil. The instant the powder falls out into the liquid, the performer, without haste, returns the pencil to his pocket.
Notice how the manual used words like performer and spectator. All the lengths that our government will go through for us citizens. Obviously, Gottlieb wasn't taking any chances should the manual ever fall into the wrong hands, which now it's public. For the longest time, the original work, titled Mulholland's Manual, was thought to be lost in the mountains of MKUltra documents that had been destroyed by Gottlieb in 1973. However, in 2007, as fate would have it, Keith Melton, an internationally recognized intelligence historian, uncovered portions of the original work. And he and Robert Wallace, that's a retired intelligence officer, together recreated Mulholland's manual. And they titled it The Official Manual of the CIA's Trickery and Deception. And the foreword reads this: Magic and espionage, they're really kindred arts. Should you want one, we'll leave a link to where you can get your very own copy of this manual in the description below. New documents that were declassified by the Biden administration show that Lee Harvey Oswald was at the Atsuchi Naval Air Force Facility in Japan in 1957, at the same time that the CIA were there and supposedly doing their acid tests. According to David Talbot, some chroniclers of Oswald's life have suggested that he was one of the young Marines whom the CIA was performing their acid tests on. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? The CIA, of course, claims that they had zero contact with Oswald, but that really doesn't seem possible by the fact that George de Mohrenschiltz, a known CIA asset, spent a lot of time with Oswald in the months just before and leading up to the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Now, we make no claims about this information at all. We just thought that it would be interesting to include it in this report. We will leave a link to these new declassified documents below. So, what are we to make of this one? Well, according to official government records, MKUltra truly did exist. So this segment, the truth segment, is going to be extremely short. Officially, MKUltra was intended to develop procedures and drugs that could be used to brainwash individuals into being more cooperative during interrogations. I don't buy it. They were trying to unlock the human brain. The government claims that it ran from 1953 to 1973, and since then, well, they learned their lesson and they no longer conduct those pesky little mind control experiments. Let me know in the comments below if you believe that one. Also, let me know if you think that the government actually succeeded in being able to unlock and control the human brain. Oh yeah, and what did you make of the declassified documents from the Biden administration? Was Lee Harvey Oswald one of MKUltra's victims? And as a reward for you sticking around until the end, write down this date. You ready? You got a pen and paper? September 4th. Big things are going to happen on September 4th. Well, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week.